You know that feeling when your own child looks right through you, as if you were nothing more than a convenience, a tool to be used and discarded whenever it suits them. You have spent your entire life building something, not just a career or a home, but a foundation of love and sacrifice that you believed would hold your family together no matter what. And then, one day, without warning, you discover that the people you gave everything to see you, not as a mother, not as a person with feelings and dignity, but as a resource, something to be exploited without even the courtesy of a genuine thank you. You wake up one morning and realize that your generosity has become an expectation. Your kindness has been mistaken for weakness, and the home you built with your own hands and your own sweat has become nothing more than a free vacation rental for people who cannot even be bothered to include you in their plans. If you have ever felt used by the people you love most, if you have ever swallowed your pain in silence because you were afraid that speaking up would mean losing them entirely, then this story is going to shake you to your core. This is a story about a mother who said yes when she should have said no, and what happened next changed everything she thought she knew about love, respect, and her own worth. I am Patricia, I am 67 years old, and I am about to tell you the story of how my own son turned my home into his honeymoon suite and invited his in-laws to sleep in my bed while I was expected to smile and pretend it was all perfectly fine. My name is Patricia Ann Caldwell, and for 43 years I lived in the same house on Maple Ridge Drive in a quiet suburb just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. It was a 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch, a garden that I had tended with my own hands since before my son David was even born, and a kitchen that had seen more holiday meals, birthday celebrations, and Sunday dinners than I could ever count. My husband Richard and I bought that house in 1982, back when the neighborhood was still mostly farmland and the nearest grocery store was a 20-minute drive. We raised 2 children in that house, my daughter Catherine, who everyone calls Katie, and my son David. Richard passed away 6 years ago from a heart attack that came without warning on a Tuesday morning in October, and since then I have lived in that house alone, keeping it exactly the way he would have wanted, maintaining every room, every garden bed, every piece of furniture, with the kind of care that comes from knowing that a home is more than walls and a roof. It is memory, it is identity, it is the physical manifestation of a life well lived. I had always been proud of my home, not in a boastful way, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that everything in it represented something real, something earned. Richard and I were both school teachers. He taught high school history and I taught 3rd grade at Meadowbrook Elementary for 31 years before I retired. We were never wealthy by any standard, but we were careful, we were disciplined, and we made smart decisions. We paid off the mortgage in 2005, we saved for our children's college education, and we invested modestly in a retirement fund that, combined with our pensions and Social Security, allowed me to live comfortably after Richard's passing. The house itself had appreciated considerably over the decades. What we bought for $89,000 in 1982 was now worth well over $600,000, thanks to the growth of the Charlotte metropolitan area and the fact that our quiet little suburb had become one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Mecklenburg County. David was my youngest. He was 35 years old, worked as a regional sales manager for a medical device company, and had always been what I would call a good son, at least on the surface. He called me every Sunday. He visited on holidays, he helped me with the gutters and the yard work when he came around, and he always told me he loved me before hanging up the phone. But there was something about David that I had noticed changing over the past 2 years, ever since he started dating Megan. Megan Thornton was 29 years old, blonde, pretty, in a way that seemed almost rehearsed, and she came from a family that had money, real money, the kind that came with a lake house in Lake Norman, a membership at the country club, and opinions about everything from wine to window treatments. Her parents, Gerald and Donna Thornton, were the type of people who measured everyone and everything by its price tag, and from the moment I met them at a dinner David organized at a restaurant I could barely afford, I felt like I was being appraised, weighed, and found lacking. The wedding happened fast. David proposed to Megan after 14 months of dating, and the engagement lasted only 5 months. I offered to help with the wedding, to contribute what I could, to be involved in the planning, the way mothers dream of being involved in their children's weddings. But Megan and her mother, Donna, made it clear from the beginning that this was their production. The Thorntons were paying for everything, and paying for everything apparently meant controlling everything. I was given a seat at the table, literally and figuratively, but I was not given a voice. My suggestions about flowers were politely dismissed. My offer to have the rehearsal dinner at my home was declined because Donna had already booked a private room at a steakhouse that charged more for appetizers than I spent on groceries in a week. Even my choice of dress for the wedding was questioned, with Megan gently suggesting that perhaps I might want to consider something more modern, something that would photograph better with the aesthetic they were going for. I swallowed every slight, every dismissal, every condescending smile from Donna Thornton, who looked at my home, my clothes, and my life with the same expression someone might have when visiting a quaint but slightly embarrassing relative. I swallowed it because David seemed happy, and because I had learned long ago that a mother's job is not to be appreciated, but to be present, to be steady, to be the ground beneath her children's feet even when they forget the ground is there. Katie, my daughter, who lived in Raleigh with her husband Mark and their 2 children, saw it more clearly than I did. She called me after the wedding shower, which I had not been asked to co-host, and said, "Mom, they are walking all over you. You need to say something." But I told her what I always told her. I told her that love is patient, and that David would come around, and that making waves would only push him further away. The wedding itself was beautiful. I will give them that. It was held at a vineyard estate about 45 minutes outside of Charlotte, with white tents and string lights and a live band that played jazz during cocktail hour. I sat in the front row and watched my son marry this woman, and I cried, not just because my baby was getting married, but because I could feel him slipping away from me, becoming part of a world that did not have room for a retired schoolteacher from a modest colonial on Maple Ridge Drive. At the reception, I was seated at a table near the back, not with the immediate family, but with a collection of distant Thornton cousins and David's college roommate who spent the entire evening on his phone. When I asked David about it later, he looked uncomfortable and said it was just a seating chart mix-up, that Megan's wedding planner had made a mistake. I nodded and smiled and told him it was fine, because that is what I do. I nod and smile and tell everyone it is fine. 3 weeks after the wedding, David called me on a Wednesday evening. I was sitting in my living room, reading a novel I had picked up from the library, and when I saw his name on my phone, I felt that little flutter of happiness I always felt when he reached out. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when he wanted something. "I need to talk to you about something." I said, "Of course, honey. What is it?" He told me that he and Megan had been planning their honeymoon. They had originally been looking at resorts in Hawaii or maybe a trip to the Amalfi Coast, but those options were expensive, and with the wedding costs and the down payment they were saving for their first house, they had decided to do something more budget-friendly. My first thought was that he was going to ask me for money, and I was already mentally calculating what I could spare from my savings without putting myself in a difficult position. But what he asked was something I never expected. "Mom," he said, "we were wondering if we could use your house for our honeymoon." I was silent for a moment, trying to process what he had just said. My house, for their honeymoon. David continued before I could respond. He explained that Megan had always loved how peaceful my neighborhood was, how the house had that beautiful porch and the garden, and how it would be like a private retreat without the expense of a hotel or resort. He said they could have a staycation honeymoon, just the two of them, enjoying the quiet, cooking meals in my kitchen, relaxing on my porch, and saving thousands of dollars in the process. He said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, as if he were asking to borrow my car for an afternoon, rather than asking me to vacate my own home so he and his new wife could play house in it. I should have said no. I should have said, "David, that is my home, and a honeymoon is supposed to be about the two of you creating your own space, not moving into your mother's house." I should have said that the very idea made me uncomfortable, that it felt like a violation of my privacy, my autonomy, my identity. But I did not say any of those things. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Well, how long were you thinking?" And he said, 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He wanted me to leave my own home for 2 weeks so that he and Megan could have a free honeymoon in it. And before I could think about it clearly, before I could consult with Katie or sleep on it or do any of the sensible things I would have advised anyone else to do, I said yes. I said, "Of course, honey, if that is what you need, I am happy to help." But then he said something that turned the uncomfortable into the unbearable. "There is one more thing, Mom," he said, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. Megan's parents, Gerald and Donna, they were hoping they could come too, just for the first few days. They want to spend some time with us after the wedding, and Megan thought it would be nice to have them there. They would take the guest room, and Megan and I would take your bedroom since it is the biggest. I felt something shift inside me, something tectonic and irreversible, like the moment you feel the ground move beneath your feet during an earthquake and you know that nothing will ever be exactly the same again. My bedroom, Richard's and my bedroom, the room where I had slept beside my husband for decades, where I had held him on the nights he could not sleep, where I had lain awake after his funeral staring at the ceiling and trying to remember how to breathe without him. That room, with our photographs on the dresser and his reading glasses still in the nightstand drawer because I could not bring myself to move them. That room was going to be occupied by my son and his new wife, while the Thorntons, who had never once stepped foot in my house without a comment about its size or its age or its outdated kitchen, would be sleeping in my guest room. And I said yes. I said it in a voice that did not sound like my own, a voice that came from the part of me that had been trained since childhood to accommodate, to make room, to shrink myself so that others could expand. I said, "Yes, David, of course, whatever you need. I will stay with Katie in Raleigh. It is no trouble at all." When I hung up the phone, I sat in my living room for a long time. The novel lay forgotten in my lap. The reading lamp cast its warm circle of light around me, and beyond that circle, the rest of the house stretched out in shadows, every room suddenly feeling like it belonged to someone else. I could already picture Donna Thornton opening my cabinets, examining my dishes with that appraising look, running her finger along the countertops checking for dust, sleeping in my guest room with its handmade quilt that my mother had sewn 40 years ago. I could picture Megan in my bathroom, using my towels, looking at herself in the mirror where I looked at myself every morning and tried to recognize the woman I used to be. If this story is resonating with you, if you know what it feels like to give and give until there is nothing left, to watch the people you love take everything you offer without ever stopping to wonder what it costs you, then you are in the right place. This channel is built for people like us, people who carry the weight of their families on their shoulders and rarely get so much as a thank you. Subscribe so we can walk this road together, because no one should have to carry these burdens alone. I called Katie the next morning. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear my grandchildren, Emma and Lucas, arguing about something in the background. When I told her what David had asked, there was a long silence, the kind of silence that is louder than any words. Then she said, "Mom, please tell me you said no." I told her I had said yes. She exhaled slowly, and I could picture her pressing her fingers to her temples the way she does when she is trying not to lose her temper. "Mom," she said, "they want to have their honeymoon in your house, with her parents, in your bedroom, the bedroom you shared with Dad. Do you hear how insane that sounds?" I told her it was not that bad, that David was trying to save money, that I was happy to help. She said, "Mom, you are not happy to help. You are afraid to say no. There is a difference." And those words landed somewhere deep inside me, in a place I had been trying very hard not to examine. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, not because it was dirty, but because I could not bear the thought of Donna Thornton finding a single thing to criticize. I washed all the sheets, bought new towels for the bathrooms, stocked the refrigerator with groceries that I knew Megan preferred, the organic milk, the gluten-free bread, the particular brand of sparkling water that cost twice as much as regular water for reasons I could not understand. I even bought fresh flowers for the dining room table in the master bedroom, my bedroom, the bedroom I was being displaced from so that my son and his wife could sleep in my bed. Every time I placed something new in that room, arranging it just so, making sure everything was perfect for their arrival, I felt a piece of my dignity quietly detach and float away, like a leaf pulled from a branch by a wind too gentle to notice, but too persistent to resist. Katie drove down from Raleigh to pick me up the day before David and Megan were scheduled to arrive. She stood in my kitchen with her arms crossed, watching me arrange a welcome basket of fruit and chocolate on the counter, and she shook her head slowly. "You even made them a welcome basket," she said. It was not a question. It was an indictment. I told her I wanted them to feel comfortable. She said, "Mom, it is your house. They should be making you feel comfortable. You should not have to leave your own home to accommodate a grown man and his wife who apparently cannot afford a hotel room but can afford a $15,000 wedding at a vineyard." I told her to stop, that I did not want to argue, that I just wanted to get through this without any conflict. She looked at me with an expression I had seen in my own mirror too many times, that mixture of love and frustration and heartbreak that comes from watching someone you care about refuse to value themselves. I packed a suitcase with 2 weeks' worth of clothes and toiletries, double-checked that I had left instructions for the thermostat, the sprinkler system, and the alarm code, and got into Katie's car. As we pulled out of the driveway, I looked back at my house, my beautiful house with its wraparound porch and its azalea bushes, and the American flag hanging by the front door that Richard had put up the year we moved in, and that I had replaced every time it faded. It looked like it always looked. Solid, dependable, waiting. But for the first time in 43 years, it was waiting for someone other than me. The first few days at Katie's house in Raleigh were pleasant enough. I adore my grandchildren. Emma was 12 and already developing a sharp wit that reminded me of Richard, and Lucas was 9 and obsessed with dinosaurs and building elaborate structures out of anything he could find. Katie's husband, Mark, was a good man, a civil engineer who was quiet and steady and treated my daughter with the kind of casual, everyday tenderness that told me he loved her, not just in the big moments, but in the small ones too. I tried to enjoy my time there, to treat it as a visit rather than an exile, but every night when I lay in Katie's guest room, which was really Emma's playroom with an air mattress on the floor, I thought about my own bed, my own room, my own house, and I felt something that I was not ready to name. David texted me on the second day. "Thanks, Mom. The house is great. Megan loves it. Her parents are really comfortable." That was it. No follow-up questions about how I was doing, whether I had gotten to Raleigh safely, whether I needed anything. Just a text that sounded like a hotel review. I responded with a smiley face and the words, "So glad you are enjoying it, honey." And then I put my phone down and went for a long walk around Katie's neighborhood, breathing in the cool spring air and trying to convince myself that I had done the right thing. On the fourth day, something happened that I was not prepared for. Katie and I were sitting on her back porch drinking coffee when my phone buzzed with a notification from the Ring doorbell camera at my house. I had installed it 2 years ago after a rash of package thefts in the neighborhood, and it automatically sent me alerts whenever motion was detected at my front door. I opened the app out of habit, not thinking much about it, and what I saw made my stomach drop. There were people at my front door, not David and Megan and the Thorntons, other people. I counted 8 people I had never seen before, carrying coolers and bags and what appeared to be cases of beer and wine. They were laughing and talking loudly, and as the door opened, I could see David greeting them with a wide smile, wearing a Hawaiian shirt and flip-flops, as if my house had been transformed into some sort of tropical resort. I watched as the strangers filed into my home, the home where I had raised my children and buried my husband's memory in every corner, and I felt the blood drain from my face. I showed Katie the video. She leaned in close to look at the screen, and when she looked back up at me, her eyes were hard with anger. "That is not a honeymoon, Mom," she said. "That is a party. They are throwing a party in your house." I shook my head, trying to find an explanation that did not confirm what my eyes were clearly seeing. "Maybe they are just friends stopping by for dinner," I said. Katie took my phone and scrolled through the earlier notifications I had missed. There were deliveries I had not ordered, boxes from Amazon and what looked like grocery delivery services. There were clips of people coming and going at various hours. Some I did not recognize at all. One clip showed Gerald Thornton standing in my garden, gesturing broadly at my rose bushes while talking on his phone, as if he were giving someone a tour of his own property. I called David. It rang 4 times before he answered, and I could hear music and laughter in the background. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice bright and slightly too loud. I asked him who was at my house. There was a brief pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had shifted to that defensive tone I recognized from his teenage years, when I would catch him in a lie and he would try to talk his way out of it. "Oh," he said, "we just invited a few friends over for dinner. It is nothing big." I told him it did not look like nothing, that I could see on my camera that there were a lot of people there. He laughed, a laugh that sounded more nervous than amused, and said, "Mom, come on. It is our honeymoon. We are just having a good time. Do not worry about it. Everything is fine." And then he said the words that cut deeper than any of the others. He said, "It is just a house, Mom. Relax. Just a house. 43 years of my life, Richard's life, our life together." The scuff marks on the hallway floor from David's first bicycle, the pencil marks on the kitchen door frame where I measured Katie and David's height every year on their birthdays, the dent in the living room wall from the time Lucas threw a baseball too hard during an indoor game of catch on a rainy Thanksgiving, the stain on the porch, steps from the glass of red wine Richard spilled the night he told me he loved me more than any words could ever express. Just a house. I told David that I expected my home to be treated with respect, and he said, "Of course, Mom, of course," and then he said he had to go because dinner was ready and he hung up. Right now you might be feeling exactly what I felt in that moment. That sinking realization that the person you raised, the person you sacrificed everything for, sees your life's work as just a convenience, just a backdrop for their own enjoyment. I need to pause here and ask you something that matters. Have you ever given someone your whole heart, your whole home, your whole life, only to discover they thought of it as nothing more than a free resource? Have you ever heard someone dismiss everything you built as if it were disposable? If that question is hitting you right now, if you are feeling that familiar ache in your chest because you know exactly what this feels like, I want you to share that with us. Your story matters, and when you speak up, someone else reading these comments will finally feel less alone. Type in the comments, "I gave everything and it was never enough." Just those 6 words. When you see how many other people write the same thing, you will know that you were never alone in this. You were just carrying it in silence. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. That night, I could not sleep. I lay on the air mattress in Emma's playroom, surrounded by her stuffed animals and her drawings taped to the walls, and I stared at the ceiling and replayed David's words over and over. Just a house, just a house. The phrase echoed in my mind like a bell that would not stop ringing. I picked up my phone and opened the Ring app again, scrolling through the footage from the evening. What I saw made me sit upright, my heart pounding. The party had grown. There were at least 15 people now, maybe more, spread throughout my home. Someone had moved my dining room chairs onto the back patio. Through the kitchen window camera, I could see people leaning against my counters, drinks in hand, treating my kitchen like a bar, and then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Someone had moved Richard's recliner. His recliner, the brown leather La-Z-Boy that he had sat in every evening for the last decade of his life, the chair that still smelled faintly of his aftershave, the chair I had never moved, never cleaned, never altered in any way, because sitting in it made me feel close to him in a way nothing else could. Someone had shoved it into the corner to make room for a folding table, and a woman I had never seen was sitting on it with her shoes kicked off, scrolling through her phone as if she were sitting on a park bench. I closed the app. I put my phone face down on the floor beside me, And then I did something I had not done since the day Richard died. I cried. Not the polite, controlled tears I had mastered over years of swallowing my feelings. These were ugly, heaving sobs that came from somewhere so deep inside me that I did not even know the place existed. I cried for my house, I cried for my husband's chair, I cried for the woman I used to be, the woman who had opinions and boundaries and a voice that did not tremble. I cried for the years I had spent making myself smaller and smaller so that everyone around me could take up more space. And when the tears finally stopped, when my breathing slowed and the room came back into focus, I felt something new. Not sadness, not resignation, something harder and sharper and more dangerous than either of those things. I felt anger. Katie found me in the kitchen the next morning at 5:30, sitting at her breakfast table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. She took one look at my face and sat down across from me without saying a word. She waited. She has always been good at waiting, my Katie. She gets that from Richard. I showed her the footage from the night before. She watched it all, every clip, her jaw tightening with each one. When she got to the part where Richard's chair had been moved, she set the phone down gently on the table and looked at me with eyes that were bright with unshed tears and fury. "That is Dad's chair," she whispered. "I know," I said. "Mom," she said, and her voice had a steadiness to it that I recognized as the calm before a very specific kind of storm. "What are you going to do?" I looked at her. I looked at my cold coffee. I looked out the window at the Raleigh morning, the sun just coming up over the rooftops, the birds starting their chorus, the world beginning another day as if nothing extraordinary was happening. And I said, "I am going home." But Katie, who is smarter than I will ever be, who inherited her father's strategic mind and my stubbornness in a combination that makes her a formidable force, put her hand on mine and said, "Not yet. First, we need to know exactly what we are dealing with." She picked up my phone and began going through every Ring notification from the past 4 days, every clip, every alert. She took screenshots. She made notes. She counted people, noted times, documented damage. And what she found was worse than I had imagined. Over 4 days, at least 30 different people had been in and out of my house. The Thorntons had apparently invited their own friends from Lake Norman for a dinner party on the second night. Megan had hosted what appeared to be a bridal brunch for her sorority sisters on the third morning. There were clips of people in my backyard using my garden hose to fill a kiddie pool they had apparently brought with them. There was a clip of Gerald Thornton lighting a cigar on my front porch, the porch where I did not even allow myself to bring food because I was afraid of attracting ants. Katie compiled everything into a folder on her phone. Then she called her husband Mark, who was getting the kids ready for school, and told him she was driving me back to Charlotte. Mark, bless him, did not ask questions. He just said, "Okay, be safe and call me if you need anything." Katie then called her office and told them she was taking a personal day, and by 7:30 in the morning, we were on Interstate 85 heading south toward Charlotte, my suitcase in the trunk, and a silence between us that was not empty but full, charged with the energy of a decision that had been too long in coming. The drive took about 2.5 hours. Katie drove and I sat in the passenger seat watching the North Carolina landscape slide past, the red clay hills and the pine forest and the billboards advertising personal injury lawyers and all-you-can-eat buffets and that particular brand of southern roadside commerce that always made Richard laugh. We did not talk much. There was not much to say. We both knew what we were doing, and we both knew it was going to be ugly, and we both knew it was necessary. We arrived at Maple Ridge Drive at 10:15 in the morning. There were 3 cars in my driveway that did not belong to me. David's silver Audi, a white Mercedes SUV that I assumed was the Thorntons, and a red BMW convertible that I did not recognize at all. Katie parked on the street, and for a moment we just sat there looking at my house. My house that looked the same from the outside but felt entirely different, like a word you have known your whole life suddenly being pronounced wrong. I took a deep breath. Katie reached over and squeezed my hand. "Let us go," she said. I walked up the path to my own front door, the path I had walked 10,000 times, the path lined with the hostas I had planted the spring after Richard died, because I needed something to nurture, something that would grow back every year no matter what. I could hear music inside, not loud but present, a kind of background soundtrack to someone else's life being lived in my space. I reached for the door handle. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into my own foyer, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. My house, which always smelled like lavender and lemon because I used the same cleaning products my mother had used, now smelled like bacon and coffee and something else, something sweet and slightly chemical that I later identified as a scented candle Megan had placed on my dining room table. A candle that had left a ring of melted wax on the wood surface my husband had refinished by hand 15 years ago. The foyer opened into the living room, and what I saw stopped me in my tracks. It was not disaster exactly. It was not as if they had trashed the place. It was more subtle than that, more insidious. My furniture had been rearranged. The couch, which had always faced the fireplace because that was how Richard liked it, had been angled toward the television. My bookshelf, which held 30 years of carefully curated novels and memoirs and poetry collections, had been partially emptied to make room for a Bluetooth speaker and a collection of wine bottles. The dining room table, which could seat 8, was covered with the remnants of what appeared to be a brunch, plates smeared with egg and syrup, champagne flutes with orange juice residue, napkins crumpled into balls. And Richard's chair, his beautiful leather recliner, was still shoved in the corner where I had seen it on the camera, but now there was a damp towel draped over the armrest and a pair of sandals tucked underneath it. I heard laughter from the kitchen. I walked toward it, Katie close behind me, and as I turned the corner I came face to face with a scene that I will never forget as long as I live. Megan was standing at my stove in a silk bathrobe making pancakes. Donna Thornton was seated at my kitchen table, reading something on her iPad and drinking coffee from my favorite mug, the one with the faded picture of the Outer Banks that Richard bought me on our 20th anniversary trip. Gerald Thornton was leaning against the counter, talking loudly about a golf game he had played the previous week, and David, my David, was sitting at the table eating scrambled eggs with his bare feet propped up on another chair, scrolling through his phone with one hand and eating with the other. None of them noticed me at first. I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen, in my own house, and watched these people living in my space as if I had never existed, as if the 43 years I had spent building this home were nothing more than a convenient foundation for their casual enjoyment. It was Donna who saw me first. Her eyes flickered up from her iPad, registered my presence, and widened with a flash of something that was not quite surprise and not quite guilt, but something in between. "Patricia," she said, and her voice had that particular quality that people use when they are caught doing something they know they should not be doing, but are not quite ready to admit it. What a surprise. David's head snapped up. "Mom," he said, and his feet came off the chair, and he stood up so quickly that he knocked his fork off the table. "What are you doing here?" I looked at my son. I looked at this 35-year-old man who stood in my kitchen with egg on his shirt and guilt on his face, and I felt the anger that had been building inside me since that first Ring notification crystallized into something clear and cold and absolutely unshakable. "I am doing here," I said, "what I should have done 4 days ago. I am coming home, because this is my home, David, mine, not a hotel, not a resort, not a vacation rental, my home." Stories like these have the power to change how we see our own lives. If you are finding clarity here, if something in this narrative is helping you understand your own situation better, consider subscribing. Every story shared on this channel is chosen to help us all grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate with ourselves and others. If you are recognizing patterns in your own life, if you are seeing yourself in this story, that recognition is the first step toward change. Stay with us. The kitchen went silent. Megan stopped mid-pancake flip, the spatula suspended in the air. Gerald put down his coffee cup with exaggerated care, as if the situation required the kind of delicate handling he reserved for his stock portfolio. Donna closed her iPad and folded her hands on the table, assuming the posture of a woman who is about to be very reasonable about something that is entirely unreasonable. And David, my poor foolish beloved David, looked at me with an expression that toggled between confusion and panic, as if the possibility of my returning to my own home had never occurred to him as a thing that might actually happen. "Mom," he said again, "I thought you were staying in Raleigh until the end of next week." "I was," I said. "But then I saw what was happening here, and I decided that 2 weeks was long enough." "Long enough for what?" he asked, and I could hear in his voice the first edge of defensiveness, the beginning of the narrative he was already constructing in his head, the one where I was the unreasonable one, the one who could not just relax and let her son enjoy his honeymoon. "Long enough for me to pretend that this is okay," I said. "Because it is not okay, David. None of this is okay." Donna Thornton cleared her throat. "Patricia," she said, using the tone one might use with a slightly confused elderly person, "I think there might be a misunderstanding. David and Megan have been so grateful for your generous offer, and we have all been taking very good care of the house." I looked at her. I looked at this woman sitting in my kitchen, drinking from my husband's anniversary mug, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly pension, telling me about a misunderstanding in my own home. I let my eyes travel slowly around the kitchen, taking in every detail with deliberate precision. The wax ring on my dining table, the champagne glasses piled in the sink, the grocery bags from Whole Foods overflowing from the trash can, the scratch on the cabinet door that had not been there when I left. I let my gaze settle back on Donna, and I said, with a voice that was remarkably calm considering the earthquake happening inside me, "Mrs. Thornton, with all due respect, there is no misunderstanding. My son asked to use my home for his honeymoon. He did not ask to turn it into a party house. He did not ask to rearrange my furniture. He did not ask to invite dozens of strangers. And he certainly did not ask to move his father's chair into a corner and throw a wet towel on it." At the mention of the chair, David flinched. He knew. He had grown up in this house. He had seen me talk to that chair on the nights when the loneliness was so heavy I needed to pretend Richard was still sitting in it, reading his history books and occasionally looking up at me with that smile that said he was exactly where he wanted to be. David knew what that chair meant, and yet he had let someone move it, push it aside like an inconvenience, like an obstacle in the way of their good time. "Mom," David said, his voice softer now, carrying the weight of a guilt he was not yet ready to fully own. "I am sorry about the chair. I did not realize. I will put it back right now." I held up my hand. "It is not about the chair," I said, "although it is about the chair too. It is about everything. It is about the fact that I gave you my home, the home your father and I built together over 4 decades, and you treated it like a free Airbnb. It is about the fact that I cleaned this house until it sparkled, bought groceries, bought flowers, made it perfect for you, and you invited 30 people I have never met to trample through it. It is about the fact that your father's memory is in every corner of this house, and you let strangers sit in his chair and put their feet on his furniture." David opened his mouth, but I was not finished. "And most of all, David, it is about the fact that you asked me to leave my own home so that your wife's parents could sleep in my guest room. Your wife's parents, who have a lake house and a country club membership and more money than I will ever see in my lifetime, needed to use my guest room. And you asked me, a 67-year-old woman living alone on a teacher's pension, to sleep on an air mattress in my granddaughter's playroom so that the Thorntons could be comfortable. And I said yes, because I love you. Because I would do anything for you. Because I have spent my entire life putting your needs before my own and calling it love, when really, David, I think it might just be a habit I was too afraid to break." The room was so quiet I could hear the clock on the kitchen wall, the one shaped like a rooster that Richard bought at a flea market in 1994 and that I had threatened to throw away at least 100 times but never did, because it made him laugh every time he looked at it. I could hear the tick-tick-tick of that ridiculous rooster clock counting the seconds in a room where 5 adults stood frozen in a moment that would redefine every relationship among them. Gerald Thornton spoke first. "Now see here," he said, puffing up in the way that certain men do when they feel their position being threatened. "We were invited. David and Megan asked us to come. We did not impose ourselves on anyone." I turned to look at him. "Mr. Thornton," I said, "you are absolutely right. You were invited, and that is between you and my son. But you are in my house, and in my house the person who decides who comes and goes, the person who makes the rules, the person whose name is on the deed, and the mortgage and the property tax bill, is me. And I am telling you, with all the politeness I can muster, that your stay here is over." Gerald's face turned a shade of red that I associated with high blood pressure and barely contained outrage. He looked at David, expecting his son-in-law to intervene, to put his mother in her place, to restore the order of things as Gerald understood them. And David, caught between the woman who raised him and the family he had married into, did the worst possible thing. He tried to play both sides. "Mom, can we just talk about this calmly?" he said. "Maybe we can work something out. Maybe you could stay in the guest room for the rest of the time, and Gerald and Donna could stay at a hotel nearby, and Megan and I could finish our honeymoon here without any more issues." Katie, who had been standing silently behind me this entire time, watching and listening and cataloging every word the way a lawyer catalogs evidence, finally spoke. She said, "David, do you hear yourself? You are asking Mom to be a guest in her own home. You are asking her to share her own house with people who have been treating it like a frat house. She is not the problem here. You are the problem." David turned to his sister with a look of wounded surprise. Katie, stay out of this, he said. This is between me and Mom. No, Katie said, stepping forward. It is between all of us. Because I have been watching this for 2 years, David. I have been watching you let your wife and her family treat our mother like she is beneath them. I have been watching you choose their comfort over Mom's dignity every single time. The wedding seating, the rehearsal dinner, the dress comments, and now this. You asked Mom to leave her own home so your in-laws could sleep in it. That is not a honeymoon plan, David. That is a betrayal. Megan, who had remained motionless at the stove through all of this, the pancake she had been making now burned to a black disk in the pan, finally found her voice. I think everyone is being a little dramatic, she said, and she said it with the particular smile of someone who is used to smoothing things over, used to minimizing conflict, used to getting what she wants by making anyone who disagrees seem unreasonable. Patricia, we have been nothing but respectful. We have taken care of everything. I do not understand why you are so upset. I looked at Megan. I looked at this young woman standing in my kitchen in a silk bathrobe, holding a spatula, surrounded by the evidence of her disrespect, telling me I was being dramatic, and something in me, something that had been sleeping for a very long time, woke up. Megan, I said, you are wearing my bathrobe. That silk robe you have on right now, that was a gift from my husband for our 30th anniversary. So when you tell me you have been respectful, I want you to look down at what you are wearing and think about what that word actually means. Megan looked down at the robe. Her face changed, cycling through surprise, embarrassment, and then, predictably, defensiveness. David said I could use whatever was in the closet, she said quickly. I looked at David. He could not meet my eyes. Mom, he said quietly, I did not think you would mind. I did not think you would mind. 8 words that contained an entire philosophy, an entire worldview, an entire life of taking someone for granted. I did not think you would mind, because I never minded, because I never objected, because I spent 67 years being the woman who did not mind, and my son, who should have known me better than anyone, believed that was all I was, a woman who did not mind. I minded very much. And in that moment, standing in my own kitchen, facing my son and his wife and her parents and all the casual cruelty of people who had convinced themselves they were doing nothing wrong, I made a decision that I should have made months ago, maybe years ago, maybe decades ago. I said, everyone needs to leave, not tomorrow, not after breakfast, not after you finish whatever you are doing here. Now. I want everyone out of my house within the hour. David stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Mom, he began, but I shook my head. 1 hour, David. Pack your things, clean up what you can, and leave your key on the kitchen counter. And tell your friends, whoever they are, wherever they are, that the party is over. Gerald Thornton slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous, he said. We rearranged our entire schedule to be here. We turned down a trip to Hilton Head for this. I looked at him with what I hope was the calm of a woman who has finally found her footing after too many years of stumbling. Then I suggest you see if Hilton Head is still available, I said. If you have ever had to find your voice after years of silence, if you have ever had to stand up in your own home and claim what was already yours, then you understand the mixture of terror and exhilaration that was pulsing through me in that moment. This channel is a place for people who are discovering their own strength, who are learning that saying no is not an act of cruelty, but an act of self-preservation. If you are on that journey, if you are finding your way back to yourself, subscribe and join us. Every story here is a reminder that it is never too late to say enough. What followed was the most uncomfortable hour of my life, and I have lived through some uncomfortable hours. David and Megan retreated to my bedroom to pack, and I could hear them arguing in hushed, furious whispers behind the closed door. Donna Thornton packed with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has been asked to leave places before, or at least who possesses the temperament to handle such situations without cracking her composure. Gerald paced the living room, making phone calls and muttering about ingratitude, which I found almost comically ironic, coming from a man who had been smoking cigars on my porch without permission. Katie appointed herself the cleanup crew, methodically washing dishes, straightening furniture, and documenting the damage with photographs on her phone. She found a red wine stain on the living room carpet, a burn mark on the bathroom vanity where someone had left a curling iron, and a crack in one of the ceramic tiles in the hallway that had not been there before. When she moved Richard's chair back to its proper position, she did it with a tenderness that made my eyes sting. She adjusted it until it was exactly right, exactly where it had always been, facing the fireplace at a slight angle so that whoever sat in it could see both the flames and the television. She smoothed the leather with her hand and looked at me across the room, and we shared a moment of understanding that did not need words. That chair was more than furniture. It was a memorial. It was a presence. It was the last physical space where Richard's shape had been imprinted, and it deserved more than to be shoved in a corner by strangers. David emerged from the bedroom with 2 suitcases and a face that had hardened into something I did not recognize. He walked past me without speaking, carrying the bags to the car. Megan followed, her eyes red, my bathrobe replaced by a sundress and a cardigan that she pulled tightly around herself as if she were cold despite the May warmth. The Thorntons were already outside, loading their Mercedes with military precision, Gerald's jaw set and Donna's expression smoothed into the blank pleasantness she wore like armor. I stood on my front porch and watched them load their cars. My neighbors, the Hendersons on one side and the Patels on the other, were conspicuously absent from their yards, though I was quite certain they were watching from their windows. This was, after all, Maple Ridge Drive, where the most exciting thing that usually happened was the annual Homeowners Association debate about acceptable fence heights. David came back to the porch one last time. He stood at the bottom of the steps looking up at me, and for a moment he looked like the boy he used to be, the 12-year-old who broke Mrs. Henderson's garden gnome with a baseball, and came to me crying because he was afraid she would never forgive him. "Mom," he said, "I am sorry. I messed up. I should have asked you before inviting other people. I should have been more careful with the house. I should have thought about Dad's chair. I am sorry." I looked at my son, and I felt the anger in me begin to soften at the edges, the way ice begins to melt, not all at once but gradually, in thin rivulets that you barely notice until they have changed the landscape. "David," I said, "I appreciate that, but I need you to understand something. Being sorry is a start, but it is not enough. You did not just make a mistake with logistics. You showed me what you really think of me. You showed me that my home, my comfort, my feelings, my memories, they all come second to what you and Megan and her family want, and I cannot pretend that does not hurt." He opened his mouth, but I continued. "I love you, David. I will always love you. You are my son, and nothing will ever change that. But I am not going to be the woman who does not mind anymore. I minded, David. I minded very much. And from now on, When I mind, I am going to say so." He nodded. His eyes were shiny, but he blinked the moisture away, the way men do when they have been taught that tears are a weakness rather than a strength. He said, "Can I call you?" I said, "You can always call me, but give me a few days first. I need to put my house back together, and I need to put myself back together." He nodded again, got in his car, and drove away. Megan did not look at me as they passed. The Thorntons left without a word, the white Mercedes pulling out of my driveway and turning right toward the highway, toward their lake house, toward their world of country club lunches and golf games and opinions about people who were not in the room to defend themselves. Katie stayed. She stayed for 3 days, helping me clean and repair and restore. We scrubbed the wax off the dining room table and polished it until it gleamed. We treated the wine stain on the carpet with a solution Katie found on the internet that involved baking soda and hydrogen peroxide and something she called prayers. We repaired the cracked tile with a kit from the hardware store. We washed every sheet, every towel, every pillowcase, erasing the traces of occupation and replacing them with the clean, familiar scent of my own laundry detergent. I went through the house room by room, checking every cabinet, every drawer, every shelf, making sure everything was where it belonged. Most things were, some things were not. A crystal vase that had been my mother's was missing from the dining room hutch. I later found it on a shelf in the garage, chipped at the rim, surrounded by empty beer cans. 3 of my good wine glasses were broken, their shards swept into the kitchen trash without comment or apology. And in the master bedroom, in my bedroom, I found a pair of expensive sunglasses on my nightstand that belonged to Megan, left behind like a territorial marker, like a flag planted in conquered soil. I put the sunglasses in a bag and mailed them to David's apartment without a note. I did not need to write one. The gesture said everything. The days after Katie left were quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the world is still dripping and damaged, but the sky is clearing, and you can see the sun trying to break through. I spent those days in a kind of contemplation I had not allowed myself in years. I sat in my garden in the mornings, drinking coffee and watching the hummingbirds visit the feeders I kept stocked year-round. I sat on my porch in the evenings, reading my novel, the one I had abandoned the night David called, and I finished it in 2 sittings. I cooked meals for one and ate them at my dining table without the television on, something I had stopped doing after Richard died because the silence had felt too heavy. Now the silence felt different. It felt chosen. It felt like mine. David called after 5 days. The conversation was stilted at first, full of long pauses and careful words. He apologized again, more specifically this time. He apologized for the party. He apologized for the Thorntons. He apologized for the chair. He apologized for the bathrobe. He apologized for saying it was just a house. That one, he said, was the worst thing I could have said. I know that, Mom, and I am ashamed of it. I listened. I did not rush to forgive him. I did not say it is fine or do not worry about it or any of the phrases I had used my entire life to smooth over the rough edges of other people's bad behavior. Instead, I said, "Thank you for saying that, David. It means a lot." And then I said something I had never said to my son before, something that felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I said, "I think we need to have some honest conversations about boundaries, about what I am willing to do and what I am not willing to do, about what respect looks like, not just in words but in actions, and about Megan and her family, and the way I have been treated since you started dating her. I could hear him take a breath. "Okay," he said. "That is fair. Can we do that in person? Can I come see you?" I said yes, but just you, David. Not Megan. Not yet. He agreed. He came the following Saturday. He arrived alone, driving up Maple Ridge Drive in his silver Audi, and I watched from the kitchen window as he parked and sat in his car for a moment, collecting himself. When he walked up the path, he paused at the hostas the way he used to pause at them as a child, touching the leaves with his fingertips as if they were fascinating. He rang the doorbell, which he had never done before, always just walking in. That small gesture, that acknowledgement that this was my space and he was asking permission to enter it, told me more about his state of mind than any apology ever could. We sat in the living room. He sat on the couch and I sat in Richard's chair, and I realized it was the first time I had ever sat in that chair with anyone watching. I had always sat in it alone, late at night, when the house was dark and quiet, and I could pretend that Richard was just in the other room getting a glass of water and would be back any minute. But now I sat in it deliberately, in daylight, facing my son, and it felt right. It felt like Richard was with me, backing me up, reminding me that I was allowed to take up space, that I was allowed to sit in the big chair and say what needed to be said. We talked for 4 hours. It was the longest and most honest conversation I had ever had with my son. I told him things I had never told him before. I told him about the wedding seating, how it had felt to be placed at the back table, how I had cried in the bathroom during the cocktail hour and wiped my tears and went back out and smiled because that is what mothers do. I told him about Donna's comments, the way she looked at my house, the way she suggested I needed a decorator, the way she once asked me at a family dinner if I had ever considered selling the house and moving into something more manageable, by which she meant something more appropriate for a woman of my means and position. I told him about Megan's gentle suggestions about my clothing, my hair, my taste, suggestions that were dressed up as helpfulness but felt like criticisms, like corrections, like someone trying to improve me into their version of acceptable. David listened. To his credit, he listened without interrupting, without defending, without explaining away. He just listened. And when I was finished, when I had said everything I needed to say, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, I did not know, and I believe him, partly. I believe that he did not know the specific incidents, the specific words, the specific wounds, but I also believe that on some level he chose not to know. He chose not to see, because seeing would have required him to act, and acting would have meant risking his relationship with Megan and her family, and that was a risk he was not willing to take, until now. Until I forced the issue by doing something I should have done years ago. I stopped being invisible. We established rules that day. They were not rigid or punitive, but clear and specific. My home was my home, and anyone who visited it would treat it with the respect it deserved. I would be included in family events as a full participant, not an afterthought. Donna and Gerald would be expected to treat me with courtesy, and if they could not manage that, they would not be welcome in my home. Megan would need to understand that her relationship with David did not diminish my relationship with him, and that a marriage adds family members but should never subtract them. And David, my son, my baby, the boy who used to crawl into my lap and tell me I was the best mommy in the world, David would need to learn that love is not just a feeling. It is a practice. It is showing up. It is paying attention. It is choosing to see the people who have always been there for you and honoring what they have given. The weeks that followed were not easy. Change is never easy, especially when it requires people to examine their own behavior and admit that they have been wrong. Megan was resistant at first. She sent me a text that was clearly composed with great care, expressing her regret for any misunderstanding and her hope that we could move forward. It was polite but impersonal, the kind of message you might send to a coworker after a disagreement about a shared project. I responded with equal care and told her that I appreciated her reaching out and that I looked forward to building a better relationship. But that building meant doing, not just saying. Donna Thornton sent me a bouquet of flowers, expensive ones from a boutique florist in Charlotte, with a card that said, "With warm regards from the Thornton family." I put the flowers in the chipped crystal vase and placed them on the dining room table, where they looked beautiful and out of place, like a bandage on a wound that needed surgery. Gerald never acknowledged the incident at all, which did not surprise me. Men of Gerald's generation and disposition do not apologize. They simply adjust their behavior and expect everyone to notice and give them credit for the adjustment. To his credit, the next time he came to my house, which was not for several months, he did not smoke on my porch and he did not touch my garden, and he said, "Nice place you have here, Patricia," which from Gerald Thornton was practically an act of worship. The real change happened between David and me. It happened slowly, the way real things do, not in dramatic gestures but in small, consistent acts of attention. He started calling me twice a week instead of once. He asked me questions about my life, my garden, my reading, my friends. He remembered my doctor's appointments and texted me to ask how they went. He started bringing Megan to my house for dinner, and Megan, who is not a bad person but is a young person who had never been challenged to think beyond her own comfort, began to soften. She complimented my cooking. She asked about the plants in my garden. She sat in the living room and looked at the family photographs on the mantel and asked me to tell her the stories behind them. And when she asked about Richard, about the man in the photographs with the kind eyes and the history teacher's gentle intensity, I told her. I told her about how he proposed in the rain outside a diner in Asheville. I told her about how he used to sing terribly in the shower, and how I pretended not to hear, because it made him happy. I told her about how he held my hand in the hospital when David was born and whispered, "We made a person, Patty. We made a whole person." And when I told her these things, her eyes got bright and she looked at me differently, as if she were seeing me for the first time not as David's mother, not as the older woman with the outdated kitchen, but as a person, a full, complex, irreplaceable person. 7 months after the honeymoon incident, Katie organized a family dinner at my house. Everyone came, Katie and Mark and the grandchildren, David and Megan, even the Thorntons who arrived with a bottle of wine that probably cost more than the entire meal I had prepared. We sat around my dining table, the table with the wax ring that had been buffed away but whose ghost I could still see if I looked at the right angle in the right light. I looked around that table at the faces of my family, the family I had built and the family my children had chosen, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt present, not invisible, not taken for granted, not the background character in someone else's story. Present, seen, valued. After dinner, David found me in the kitchen doing the dishes. He picked up a towel and started drying without being asked, and for a few minutes We stood side by side at the sink the way we used to when he was young, and I would wash and he would dry, and we would talk about his day at school or argue about whether the Panthers were going to make the playoffs. "Mom," he said, "I want to tell you something." I said, "Okay." He said I was wrong, not just about the honeymoon, about a lot of things. I was so focused on building my life with Megan, on fitting in with her world, that I forgot where I came from. I forgot who made me who I am, and I am sorry. I looked at my son. He was 35 years old, and he was standing in my kitchen with a dish towel in his hands and tears running down his face. And he looked exactly like he did when he was 8 years old. And he came home from school crying because a boy had told him his lunch was weird because I had packed homemade empanadas instead of sandwiches, something I had learned from a Puerto Rican colleague and thought David would enjoy. I had held him then and told him that there was nothing weird about trying new things, and that anyone who made him feel small for being different was telling you more about themselves than about you. I wanted to hold him now, to pull him close and tell him everything was forgiven, everything was fine, everything was back to normal. But I knew that everything was not back to normal. It was back to something better than normal. It was back to honest. I dried my hands on my apron and put my hands on his face, the way I used to do when he was small. "David," I said, "I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I will not forget what happened because I cannot afford to. Not because I want to punish you, but because remembering is how I protect myself. I spent 67 years forgetting, David. Forgetting to speak up, forgetting to value myself, forgetting that I have the right to say no, I am not going to forget anymore." He nodded, wiping his eyes with the dish towel, and I thought about how Richard would have loved this moment, would have stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and his eyes shining, and that proud, gentle smile he wore whenever he witnessed someone he loved becoming braver than they thought they could be. I am 67 years old. I live alone in a 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Ridge Drive in a suburb outside Charlotte, North Carolina. My house smells like lavender and lemon. Richard's chair sits in its proper place by the fireplace. The garden is blooming. The hostas are thick and green along the front path. There is a rooster clock on the kitchen wall that ticks too loudly and is not remotely attractive. But I will never take it down because it was Richard's and because every time I look at it, I remember that love lives in the strangest places, in the things that should not matter but somehow matter most. I learned something about myself in those difficult weeks, something I should have learned decades ago, but that life has a way of hiding from you until you are ready to see it. I learned that being kind does not mean being silent, that being generous does not mean being exploited, that being a good mother does not mean being a doormat, and that the most important person to set boundaries for is not the person who crosses them, but yourself, because you are the one who has to live with the consequences of every line you fail to draw. If you have ever felt invisible in your own life, if you have ever given everything and received nothing but assumptions in return, I want you to know something. You are not invisible. You are not disposable. You are not just a house to be used when convenient and forgotten when not. You are a person, a full, complex, irreplaceable person, and you deserve to be treated like one, not sometimes, not when it is convenient, always. My name is Patricia Ann Caldwell. I am 67 years old, and I am no longer the woman who does not mind. If this story has touched something inside you, if you are carrying your own version of this pain, this channel is a place for you. Here, We share stories of people who found their voice, who drew their lines, who refused to be diminished. Subscribe and stay with us, because every story is a reminder that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. You are seen here. You are heard here. You matter here. And to David, if you are listening, I want you to know something. That dinner last month when you dried the dishes without being asked, when you stood in my kitchen and cried and told me you were wrong, that was the proudest moment of my life as your mother. Not because you apologized, but because you meant it. Because you chose to see me. And in seeing me, you became the man your father always knew you could be. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. The rooster clock ticks on my kitchen wall. The garden grows. Richard's chair holds his shape. And I, Patricia Ann Caldwell, sit on my porch in the evenings with my novel and my coffee, and the certainty that my home is my own, my life is my own, and my voice, quiet as it may be, is finally loud enough to be heard.